What would you do if you were challenged to marry someone obese? This black millionaire made an unexpected decision. He was challenged to marry an obese woman. Subscribe to the channel now. Caleb Reynolds sat at the head of the private dining room, surrounded by evidence of wealth and power. The room was filled with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and idle chatter as Caleb's friends, a group of equally wealthy and successful men, enjoyed their large dinner. Caleb had always been the star of the show, the one everyone looked up to for his quick thinking, sharp business sense, and his unmatched ability to flaunt his success. He was the picture of confidence, a self-made black millionaire who had worked his way up from nothing and wasn't shy about letting the world know it. Tonight was no different. The group had gathered at Omar's Steakhouse, a restaurant that catered to the city's elite. As the conversation turned from business to pleasure, the topic of relationships came up. Caleb, who had never been one to settle down, laughed as his friends teased him about his bachelor lifestyle. "Man, you're living the dream, Caleb," said DeAndre, one of his longtime friends, raising his glass. "No strings attached, no commitments, and all the women you could ever want. You got it figured out." Caleb smirked, reclining in his chair. "Why settle down when you can have it all?" he replied, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Life's too short to be tied down. I've worked hard to get here, and I'm not about to give that up." The men around the table laughed and nodded in agreement, but one of them, Elijah, leaned forward with a mischievous grin. Elijah was known for stirring the pot, and tonight he was in the mood for something more than just small talk. "You know what, Caleb?" Elijah began, his eyes glinting with amusement. "I bet you're just scared. You've got all the money, all the success, but you've never been able to handle a real relationship. Maybe you don't have what it takes." Caleb raised an eyebrow. His competitive nature instantly piqued. "Scared? Please," he said. "What are you trying to say, Elijah? That I can't handle a relationship? You're out of your mind." Elijah leaned back, crossing his arms with a smug look on his face. "I'm just saying, maybe you've had it easy because you've always gone for the trophy type. You know, women who look good on your arm but don't require much effort. What if you had to date someone real? Someone outside your usual type? Could you do it?" The rest of the table fell silent, sensing that Elijah was leading up to something. Caleb was never one to back down from a challenge. He felt his pride bubbling to the surface. He knew where Elijah was going with this, and he wasn't about to let his friend get the better of him. "What's the point of this, Elijah?" Caleb asked, narrowing his eyes. "The point is," Elijah replied, leaning forward again, "I bet you can't handle a serious relationship with someone who doesn't fit your usual standards. In fact, I dare you to find a woman who's, let's say, not conventionally attractive. Maybe someone plus size, someone you'd never consider dating. And don't just date her, actually make a commitment." Caleb chuckled, shaking his head. "You're crazy. You think I can't handle that? Come on, man, that's too easy." "Oh yeah?" Elijah grinned, his eyes filled with mischief. "Then prove it. I'm willing to put money on this. Date someone completely different from the women you usually go for. Someone who's overweight, works an ordinary job, and doesn't care about your money. I bet you can't make it last even a month." The room erupted in laughter, but Caleb's eyes narrowed. His competitive streak flared, and he could feel the heat rising in his chest. He wasn't one to back down from a challenge, especially not in front of his friends. "All right," Caleb said, his voice steady. "I'll take that bet. But we're not talking about some casual fling. I'll do you one better. I'll get engaged to her in a month. You put your money where your mouth is and we'll see who's laughing." Elijah's grin widened as he realized he had successfully baited Caleb into the challenge. The other men at the table exchanged looks of disbelief and amusement, but they knew Caleb well enough to know that he never backed down once his pride was on the line. "You're on," Elijah said, extending his hand. "Let's see how far you can take this." They shook hands, sealing the bet as the rest of the group cheered and clinked their glasses in celebration. But as the laughter died down and the conversation shifted, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that he had just walked into something far more complicated than he had anticipated. The next day, Caleb sat in his office, reflecting on the bet he had so confidently accepted. His assistant, Carla, walked in, holding a stack of documents for him to sign. As she placed them on his desk, she noticed the thoughtful look on his face. "Everything all right, Caleb?" Carla asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Yeah, I'm fine, Caleb replied, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. Carla, who had worked with Caleb for years, could tell something was off. You sure? You don't usually look this distracted. Caleb sighed, leaning back in his chair. It's nothing, just a bet I made last night with the guys. It's kind of dumb, really. Carla raised an eyebrow. What kind of bet? Caleb hesitated before explaining. Elijah challenged me to date a woman who's not my usual type. You know, someone plus size, works a regular job. He thinks I can't handle a serious relationship with someone outside of my usual circle. Carla crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed. So, let me get this straight. You made a bet to date a woman as some kind of challenge? Caleb nodded, realizing how ridiculous it sounded. Yeah, pretty much. Carla stared at him for a long moment before shaking her head. That's a terrible idea, Caleb. I know, he said, rubbing his thighs, but I've already committed. I can't back out now. Well, Carla said, her voice firm, if you're going to go through with this, you'd better not make it a game. If you actually meet someone, you need to treat her with respect. This isn't a joke. Caleb sighed, knowing Carla was right. I hear you, he said. And don't worry, I'm not going to be that guy. I'll do this right. But as Caleb sat back and thought about what lay ahead, he realized that he had no idea where to begin. He was about to embark on a challenge that would test more than just his dating preferences. It would force him to confront parts of himself he wasn't sure he was ready to face. A few days after the bet was made, Caleb found himself sitting in his office, still wondering how he was going to fulfill the challenge he had so confidently accepted. His usual routine had been disrupted, his mind constantly going back to that night with his friends. He had promised Elijah and the others that he would not only date, but get engaged to a woman who didn't fit the typical image of beauty he was used to. The whole thing felt ridiculous now, but Caleb was never one to back out of a challenge. Determined to make good on his promise, Caleb asked Carla for help. After all, she had been with him for years, and there was no one he trusted more. All right, Carla, Caleb said one morning as they sat in his office. I'm in over my head here. I need your help. Carla, who had already expressed her disapproval of the bet, looked at him with a raised eyebrow. So you're actually going through with this? Caleb nodded, feeling a bit embarrassed. I don't really have a choice now. But if I'm going to do this, I want to do it right. Carla sighed, shaking her head, but she appreciated the fact that Caleb was willing to listen. All right, if you're serious about this, I know someone. She's not the kind of woman you're used to, and she won't be impressed by your money or your flashy lifestyle. Her name is Sasha, and she's a nurse at the local hospital. We volunteer together sometimes at community events. Sasha? Caleb repeated, leaning back in his chair. Tell me more. Carla gave him a serious look. I'm only setting this up because you promised you'll be respectful, Caleb. Sasha's a good person. She's hardworking, kind, and doesn't care about any of this superficial stuff. She's also plus size, and she's dealt with her share of people judging her for her appearance. Don't waste her time. Caleb nodded, feeling the weight of Carla's warning. I get it, I'll treat her right. The following weekend, Carla arranged for Caleb and Sasha to meet at a community event, a health fair where Sasha was volunteering. Caleb agreed to attend, hoping that the casual environment would make things easier. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing. This wasn't going to be like any of his past dates. When Caleb arrived at the health fair, the atmosphere was nothing like the upscale parties and events he was used to. There were families with children, booths offering free health screenings, and volunteers everywhere. Caleb felt slightly out of place in his designer clothes, but he tried to shake off the discomfort. He spotted Carla near one of the booths and headed over. There she is, Carla said, nodding toward a woman helping with blood pressure checks. Caleb followed her gaze and saw Sasha for the first time. She was smiling warmly at an elderly man as she took his blood pressure, her focus entirely on the people she was helping. She wore scrubs, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wasn't the kind of woman who fit Caleb's usual type, but there was something undeniably genuine about her. Sasha radiated a quiet confidence that intrigued him. Carla pushed him. Go on, Introduce yourself." Caleb approached the booth feeling more nervous than he had expected. When Sasha finished with her patient, she glanced up and saw him standing there. Her smile was polite but reserved. "Hi," Caleb said, offering his hand. "I'm Caleb, Carla's friend." Sasha shook his hand, her grip firm. "Nice to meet you. Carla's mentioned you." Caleb chuckled awkwardly. "I hope she had good things to say." Sasha raised an eyebrow. "She said you could use a little humility." Caleb flinched, though Sasha's tone wasn't unkind. "Yeah, that sounds like Carla," he said. "She's not wrong." Sasha looked him over, clearly assessing him in the same way Caleb was assessing her. But where Caleb had been used to women fawning over him because of his wealth and status, Sasha seemed unimpressed. She wasn't interested in his polished appearance or his reputation. Her focus was elsewhere. "So," Sasha said after a moment, "what brings you to a health fair on a Saturday?" "Not exactly the kind of place I'd expect to see someone like you." Caleb laughed, appreciating her directness. "Yeah, this isn't my usual scene, but I wanted to get involved. Carla speaks highly of you, and I thought I'd see what you're all about." Sasha crossed her arms, her expression skeptical but curious. "I don't buy that. Carla probably dragged you here." "Okay, you got me," Caleb admitted, raising his hands in mock surrender. "She did convince me to come, but I'm glad I did." Sasha's gaze softened slightly and she smiled, a real smile this time. "Well, I'm glad you're here too. We could always use more volunteers." As the day went on, Caleb stayed at the fair, helping wherever he could. He and Sasha didn't spend much time talking at first, but as the hours passed, they started to have more conversations, small, meaningful exchanges in between helping others. Sasha was passionate about her work, and it showed in everything she did. She had a way of making people feel comfortable and valued, no matter who they were. By the end of the day, Caleb found himself drawn to Sasha in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't impressed by his money or his status, and she didn't go out of her way to win his approval. Instead, she was confident in herself and her abilities, and that confidence was refreshing. When the fair began to wind down, Caleb found himself standing next to Sasha as they packed up supplies. He cleared his throat, feeling a little awkward. "I had a good time today," Caleb said. "Would you be interested in grabbing dinner sometime? I'd like to get to know you better." Sasha looked at him for a long moment, clearly thinking it over. Finally, she smiled. "I don't usually do things like this, but sure, why not?" Caleb grinned, feeling a sense of victory, not because he had won the challenge, but because he had managed to connect with someone who saw beyond the surface. As they exchanged numbers, Caleb couldn't help but feel a little nervous about what lay ahead. He had agreed to a bet that was supposed to be a game, but something told him that this was going to be more than just a challenge. Meeting Sasha had already begun to change the way he saw things, and he wasn't sure he was ready for everything that would come next. In the weeks following the health fair, Caleb found himself thinking about Sasha more often than he expected. Their first dinner together had been simple, nothing like the expensive dates Caleb was used to. He had taken her to a modest, cozy restaurant downtown, one she had suggested, and they had spent the evening talking about everything except his wealth and success. For the first time in a long while, Caleb didn't feel like he had to impress anyone. Sasha didn't care about his status. She was interested in the man behind the money. As Caleb and Sasha continued to see each other, something began to shift inside him. At first, he had treated the challenge like any other competition, a game to win, but the more time he spent with Sasha, the more he realized that this wasn't a game. Sasha was real. She was thoughtful, kind, and fiercely independent. She had a life full of meaning, even without the trappings of wealth. And most of all, she didn't need him. It was Caleb who found himself needing her. Sasha had been clear from the beginning that she wasn't looking for anything casual. She had dealt with too many men who saw her as less than because of her size or overlooked her entirely. She was tired of being someone's challenge or a checkbox on a list. She had told Caleb on their second date that she wouldn't tolerate dishonesty or games. If he was going to spend time with her, it had to be real. Caleb had agreed, but as the days passed, he felt the weight of the bet hanging over him. He hadn't told Sasha about the challenge he had made with Elijah and the others. How could he? How could he tell her that this whole relationship had started as a way for him to prove something to his friends? It would ruin everything. But the longer he kept the secret, the worse he felt. One evening, as they sat together on a park bench watching the sunset, Caleb turned to Sasha and tried to gather the courage to speak. Sasha noticed his discomfort and raised an eyebrow. "Something on your mind?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. Caleb hesitated, unsure of how to begin. He had grown to care for Sasha in a way he hadn't expected, and the last thing he wanted to do was hurt her. But he knew he couldn't keep the truth hidden any longer. "I need to tell you something," Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I haven't been honest about." Sasha's expression remained neutral, but her eyes narrowed slightly, as if bracing for whatever was coming next. "Okay, go ahead." Caleb took a deep breath. "When we first met, it wasn't just by chance. Carla introduced us because I made a stupid bet with my friends." Sasha's posture stiffened and she turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. "A bet?" she repeated, her voice flat. Caleb nodded, feeling a wave of guilt crash over him. "Yeah, my friend Elijah, he challenged me. He said I couldn't date someone who wasn't my usual type, someone plus size, someone who didn't care about my money or status. I didn't think it through and I agreed. But Sasha, it's not like that anymore, I swear. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to..." "To what?" Sasha's voice was sharper now, her eyes narrowing. "To actually care about me? Is that what you're trying to say?" Caleb saw the truth in her words. "Yes. I didn't know what I was getting into. But the more time I spent with you, the more I realized how wrong I was. This wasn't about the bet. You're not just part of some stupid challenge. I care about you, Sasha. I mean that." Sasha stared at him for a long moment, her face expressionless. Caleb couldn't read her emotions, and the silence between them felt like a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. Finally, Sasha stood up. Her arms crossed over her chest as she looked down at him. "Do you have any idea how insulting that is?" she asked, her voice steady but cold. "Do you know how many times I've been treated like some kind of experiment? Men who think they're doing me a favor by dating me, like I should be grateful they even looked my way. And now you're telling me that you started this whole thing because of a bet?" Caleb stood up, desperate to explain himself. "I know it sounds terrible, but it's not like that anymore. I've changed, Sasha. I've learned from this. You've changed me." Sasha shook her head, her expression filled with hurt and disappointment. "Maybe you have changed, Caleb, but the fact that this started as a joke, I don't know if I can trust you anymore." Caleb felt his heart sink. He had known this would be hard, but he hadn't expected it to hurt this much. Sasha was right. He had treated their relationship like a game at first, and now he was paying the price. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Caleb said, his voice soft. "But I'm asking you to give me a chance to make things right. I care about you, Sasha. I don't want to lose what we have." Sasha sighed, her eyes softening slightly as she looked away. For a moment, Caleb thought she might walk away for good, but then she turned back to him, her expression conflicted. "I don't know, Caleb," she said quietly. "I don't know if I can just forget about this, but I'll think about it." Caleb nodded, understanding that he couldn't push her for more. "That's all I'm asking. Just think about it." Sasha walked away, leaving Caleb standing alone in the park. The sunset that had once seemed so beautiful now felt like a reminder of everything he might lose. As he watched her disappear into the distance, Caleb knew that he had a long way to go if he wanted to win her trust back. The next few days were filled with silence. Sasha didn't return his calls or texts, and Caleb felt the weight of his mistake hanging over him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure how to fix something. He had always been able to talk his way out of situations or use his charm to get what he wanted. But this was different. Sasha wasn't interested in his money or his status. She wanted honesty, respect, and trust. And Caleb wasn't sure if he had earned any of that yet. The days without Sasha felt endless for Caleb. He had spent much of his life chasing after success, wealth, and status, always convinced that he could get whatever he wanted if he worked hard enough. But now, for the first time, he found himself faced with something he couldn't buy or charm his way into: Sasha's trust. After their conversation in the park, Sasha had gone quiet. She didn't respond to his texts, didn't answer his calls. Caleb tried to give her space, knowing that he had hurt her deeply. But the more time passed, the more he realized just how much she meant to him. What had started as a bet to prove to his friends that he could date someone outside his type had turned into something far more real than he had ever expected. Sasha had seen through the wall he had spent years building. She didn't care about his wealth or his reputation, and that was exactly what had drawn him to her in the first place. She challenged him, made him see the world in a different way. And now, Caleb was left wondering if he had destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him because of his own arrogance. Determined to make things right, Caleb decided to reach out to someone who might be able to help: Carla. She had been the one to introduce him to Sasha in the first place, and she knew him better than anyone else. If anyone could give him advice, it was her. "Carla," Caleb said one afternoon, walking into her office. "I need your help. I really messed things up with Sasha." Carla looked up from her desk, raising an eyebrow. "You don't say," she replied, her tone dry. "I warned you, Caleb. I told you not to treat this like a game." Caleb sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, you were right. I was an idiot. But I didn't expect to fall for her, and now I've ruined it." Carla leaned back in her chair, studying him for a moment before speaking. "So what are you going to do about it?" "I want to prove to her that I've changed," Caleb said, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I don't know where to start. She won't talk to me, and I don't blame her. I need to show her that I'm serious, that I'm not the same guy who made that stupid bet." Carla nodded, her expression softening slightly. "It's going to take more than words, Caleb. Sasha isn't the type to be won over by apologies alone. You need to show her that you've grown, that you understand what you did wrong." Caleb looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes. "But how? What can I do to make it right?" Carla paused, thinking carefully. "You know Sasha volunteers a lot, right? She's passionate about helping others, especially in the community. Maybe you could get involved, show her that you're willing to put in the effort, not just for her, but for something bigger than yourself." Caleb nodded slowly, realizing Carla was right. Sasha had always talked about how important her work was. She helped others, making a difference in their lives. Caleb had spent so much time focused on his own success that he had never really considered how much good he could do with his resources. Maybe it was time for that to change. That weekend, Caleb signed up to volunteer at the local community center where Sasha often worked. He didn't tell her he was coming. He didn't want her to think this was just another attempt to win her back. Instead, he wanted to prove to himself and to her that he was serious about making a difference. When he arrived at the center, he felt out of place at first. The other volunteers greeted him warmly, but Caleb couldn't help but feel like he didn't belong. He had spent years in boardrooms and luxury events, and now here he was, handing out meals to families who were struggling to get by. But as the day went on, something shifted inside him. Seeing the smiles on people's faces, knowing that he was doing something meaningful, gave Caleb a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't felt in a long time. By the end of the day, Caleb was exhausted but strangely content. As he helped clean up the center, he glanced across the room and saw Sasha. She hadn't noticed him yet, busy talking to a group of volunteers. For a moment, Caleb hesitated. He wasn't sure if he should approach her, but something in him told him it was time. Taking a deep breath, Caleb walked over to her. Sasha turned, and her eyes widened slightly when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone cautious but curious. "I'm volunteering," Caleb replied simply. "I wanted to help." Sasha studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You didn't have to come here for me, Caleb." "I didn't," Caleb said, shaking his head. "Well, not entirely. Carla gave me the idea, but I needed to do this. Not just for you, but for myself. I've spent so much time thinking about my own success, my own life, and I've never really given back. I want to change that." Sasha crossed her arms, clearly still guarded. So, what? You think one day of volunteering is going to make up for everything? No, Caleb admitted, his voice sincere. I know it's not. But I'm not here to impress you, Sasha. I'm here because I want to be better. I know I messed up. I was selfish and I hurt you. But I'm trying to learn from it. Sasha sighed, her expression softening slightly. I'm not going to lie, Caleb. What you did really hurt me. I've dealt with enough people who saw me as some kind of challenge, and I'm not interested in being someone's game. I understand, Caleb said quietly. And I'm sorry. I really am. But I'm not that guy anymore. I'm not asking for a second chance right away. I just want you to know that I'm trying to be better. Sasha looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. Finally, she nodded, though her expression remained cautious. I'll think about it, she said, her voice soft but firm. Caleb nodded, knowing that this was all he could ask for. That's all I'm asking. As Sasha turned to walk away, Caleb felt a strange sense of hope. He didn't know if she would ever fully trust him again, but he knew that he had taken the first step toward becoming the man he wanted to be, a man who valued more than just success and status. Over the next few weeks, Caleb continued volunteering at the community center, working quietly and steadily to make a difference. He didn't expect anything in return. He wasn't doing it for show. He was doing it because it felt right, because it was the kind of man he wanted to be. And slowly, as the weeks passed, Sasha began to see that change in him. She watched as Caleb became more involved, as he showed genuine care for the people around him. It wasn't just about winning her back. It was about becoming a better version of himself. One evening, as they stood side by side at the community center, Sasha turned to Caleb and smiled, a real warm smile that sent a surge of hope through him. Maybe you're not such a bad guy after all, she said softly. Caleb grinned, feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had earned a second chance. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more inspiring and powerful stories to you. Want to see more? Click the links on your screen to explore other life-changing stories filled with heart, growth, and transformation. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.